like to welcome anybody who's listening to my strange little video podcast. This is where I go when I get ideas in my head that I wouldn't subject anybody in my life to listening to me blab on about. And so I do a video podcast and I put it on the internet where things go to be ignored. And today I want to talk about the NBA because what I was thinking about was the long-term outlook that NBA teams have to take in order to build a successful contender. But to me, it's fascinating how teams can do that when the NBA changes so rapidly that a 5-year plan could hardly expect to produce any fruit when the NBA looks so different after just a 5-year gap. And so I was looking back at what the NBA looked like just 5 years ago, and it's amazing how different it looked. So the NBA was wrapping up the 17-18 season, and I just wanted to go through these awards and just look at how different things were. For MVP, our winner was James Harden. He was a Houston Rocket. Since then, he's been with the Nets, and now he's with the 76ers. The runner-up was LeBron James, playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's been a Laker most of the time since then, even a champion with the Lakers since then. Anthony Davis, also been a Laker and a champion, was with the Pelicans just 5 years ago. And you may say, well, those are the MVPs, the people in their prime. They're supposed to sort of age out of relevance. What you really need is young talent to build around. Well, this one's just as precarious because because the Rookie of the Year 5 years ago was Ben Simmons with the Philadelphia 76ers. They thought they had a young gem to build around. They did in Joel Embiid, but not so much Ben Simmons. The runner-up, Donovan Mitchell, playing for the Jazz. Mitchell's now with the Cavaliers. Didn't even make it 5 years with his team. And third place was Jason Tatum. I just want to point that out because I think it's awesome that Tatum's still a Celtic. And the awards stay still just as volatile as we move on to the other awards. For most improved player, Victor Oladipo with the Indiana Pacers. He was already a bit of a journeyman because he started with the Magic, went to OKC, blew up with Indiana, but then injuries quickly derailed his career, and now he's a seldom healthy, seldom used player for the Miami Heat. There was a stop in Houston in between there, by the way. Speaking of Houston, the runner-up was Clint Capella, who has been playing the past several years with the Atlanta Hawks. And third place was Spencer Dinwiddie, who is still a Brooklyn Net, but not really still a Brooklyn Net. He went to Washington, then he went to Dallas, and now he's back with Brooklyn. So a lot changed, still ended up in the same destination. Sixth man of the year was Lou Williams. Lou Williams pretty much just aged out of the league at this point. He won this award in the latter parts of his career, so good for him. Doesn't do much for your team 5 years later. Runner-up was Eric Gordon, who was with the Rockets until this trade deadline, but now he's a Clipper. Third place was Fred VanVleet. He's still with the Raptors, and he's a champion with the Raptors. That's great, but he's about to be a free agent, and there's a lot of speculation that he will not continue to be with them after the summer. Defensive Player of the Year was Rudy Gobert with the Utah Jazz, and of course now Gobert with the Wolves, and he's more talked about for what the Wolves gave up to get him than his defensive prowess, though maybe that's not fair to Gobert. Runner-up was Joel Embiid. He's still anchoring the defense for the Sixers, so that's good for them. Third place was Anthony Davis for the Pelicans, who are now being anchored by, well, not so much Zion because Zion's hurt all the time. Coach of the Year was Dwayne Casey. Now this one was sort of a sad case because he won Coach of the Year and then was fired in that same offseason. And then, luckily for the Raptors, they get a good one in Nick Nurse, and they win the championship the next year, but that had to sting for Dwayne Casey. Runner-up was Quinn Snyder, the Utah Jazz, who's now coaching the Atlanta Hawks. Third place was Brad Stevens, who's still with the Celtics, but no longer the coach on the sideline. In fact, they're on their second coach since Brad Stevens, though weird circumstances dictated that. Executive of the Year was Daryl Morey, who is now making the decisions for the Philadelphia 76ers. The rebound leader, this may surprise people, Andre Drummond for the Detroit Pistons. He won and pretty much led in every rebounding category, offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, rebounding rate, whatever it was. He was pretty much the leader in it. Assist leader was Russell Westbrook with the OKC Thunder. Westbrook, of course, has played several places since this. He went to Houston, then he went to Washington, then he went to the Lakers, and now he's with the Clippers. So a lot of stops for Russell Westbrook since he was the assist leader with OKC. And of course, you cannot talk about change over the last 5 years in the NBA without talking about Kevin Durant, who was with the Golden State Warriors, An all-star, first-team All-NBA, coming off of back-to-back Finals MVPs before leaving to go to Brooklyn to team up with Kyrie Irving, and then ultimately this year asking out and being sent to the Phoenix Suns. LaMarcus Aldridge of the San Antonio Spurs, who is now retired from the league, had played a little for Brooklyn, but he was an all-star and second-team All-NBA. A lot of other all-stars no longer with their teams. Let's run through some of them. Kyrie Irving, all-star with the Boston Celtics. Of course, committed to staying with the Celtics, and then decided to go to Brooklyn anyways, and now is with the Dallas Mavericks. Paul George was an all-star with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He signed an extension with the Thunder, which surprised everyone, and then a year later said, yeah, I want to be traded, and became a Clipper. Jimmy Butler was an all-star with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Since then, he was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for a year, and then he signed as a free agent with the Miami Heat. Kevin Love was an all-star with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He stayed with them until he was bought out this year, and now he's with the Miami Heat. Kyle Lowry, all-star with the Raptors. Stayed with the Raptors and won a championship the next year. Now he's with the Miami Heat. DeMarcus Cousins was an all-star with the Pelicans. Listen to what a wild ride 5 years has been for DeMarcus Cousins. He played a year with Golden State, only played 30 games. He sat out a year with an ACL injury, and he's had short stints with Houston, the Clippers, Milwaukee, and Denver, and is currently out of the NBA. Goran Dragic was an all-star with Miami, and much like DeMarcus Cousins, a little bit of a wild ride at the end here. Since Miami, he's had short stints with Toronto, Brooklyn, Chicago, and Milwaukee. Kristaps Porzingis was an all-star with the Knicks. Remember when he was the next big thing for New York, and then slowed down by injuries. He was traded to Dallas, didn't really pan out in Dallas, and now he's with the Wizards where he's doing pretty well. Kemba Walker was an all-star with the Charlotte Hornets. After this, Walker signed as a free agent in Boston, had a couple good years there, admittedly was slowed down by some knee troubles, had short stints in New York and Dallas, and is currently not on an NBA team. John Wall was an all-star with the Washington Wizards. This was about the last that we saw of healthy John Wall. Since then, he had a stint with the Rockets, started this year with the Clippers, is no longer with an NBA team this year. Al Horford was an all-star with the Boston Celtics. Much like Spencer Dinwiddie, you could look back and say, well, he was a Celtic then, he's a Celtic now, nothing changed. But there was a year with the Philadelphia 76ers that did not go very well. Then he was sort of banished to OKC, where he just sat out a year before being traded back to Boston, where we happily welcomed Al back to the Celtics. Now, it isn't just about the people who got awards or the people who were all-stars. There's a lot of other big names and big shifts that happen in the NBA, and so I'm just going to run through some of them, some things that look much different in the NBA now. DeMar DeRozan was with the Toronto Raptors. Then he was traded in the offseason to the San Antonio Spurs. Now he's with the Chicago Bulls. Of course, he was traded for Kawhi Leonard, who came to the Raptors, helped them win a championship, and then left for the Clippers, where he occasionally plays. Domantas Sabonis was with the Indiana Pacers 5 years ago. He started his career in OKC, was traded as part of the trade package for Paul George. Eventually, Indiana flipped him for Tyrese Halliburton in a move that was considered controversial for the Kings, but now Sabonis is an all-star with the Kings, helping getting them into playoff to break their playoff drought, and he's probably going to be All-NBA. Drew Holiday was with the Pelicans 5 years ago before they traded him to Milwaukee, and he has helped lead Milwaukee to a championship, and he's been an all-star since then. Andrew Wiggins was with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Of course, he was traded to the Warriors and helped them win a championship last year. CJ McCollum was with the Portland Trail Blazers, and now he is with the New Orleans Pelicans. 5 years ago, Blake Griffin signed a big contract with the Clippers and then was traded to the Pistons just a handful of games into that. He had a good stint with the Clippers for about a year, and then injuries really slowed him down. He got bought out, played for the Nets for a little while, and now he's a vet on the Celtics. And the Pistons traded Tobias Harris to get Blake Griffin. He played for the Clippers, and now he plays for the Philadelphia 76ers. He certainly has a thing for playing for teams with a red, white, and blue color scheme. Perhaps my favorite transition over these 5 years, though, has been what has happened to the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, Yes, they got a championship out of all the changes they made, but still amazing to look back at what their roster looked like just 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the Lakers had Kyle Kuzma, who was sort of a favorite son of LA. They didn't think they would give him up in anything for any trade package, and now Kyle Kuzma is with the Washington Wizards. Julius Randle is with the New York Knicks. He's an all-star. He's an all-NBA performer, formerly of the Lakers. Brandon Ingram, also an all-star, but with the New Orleans Pelicans. He was part of the trade package for Anthony Davis. Lonzo Ball went to New Orleans, and now he's with Chicago Bulls. Unfortunately, health has derailed his career, but he has been awesome when healthy. Jordan Clarkson, Sixth Man of the Year with Utah Jazz. Brook Lopez, this is perhaps my favorite one because Brook Lopez was with the Lakers on a cheap contract. They could have kept him. They just didn't want him. And now he is a champion with the Milwaukee Bucks and possibly Defensive Player of the Year this year. They also had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who was part of the trade for Russell Westbrook, went to the Wizards. Now he plays for the Denver Nuggets, the number 1 seed in the West. And Ivica Zubac, who they traded away to their in-town rivals, the Clippers, and he's the starting center for the Clippers. Maybe the strangest thing looking back in the NBA is when you think of the stars who were still in the league just 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Vince Carter was playing for the Sacramento Kings. That's the strange one to see, Vince Carter in a Sacramento Kings uniform. But Dirk still playing for the Dallas Mavericks. Manu still suiting up for the San Antonio Spurs. And Dwayne Wade came back and finished his career with the Miami Heat. And that doesn't include several other key players or big-name players who were still playing this year. Guys like Paul Gasol, Tony Parker, Joe Johnson, Zach Randolph, Kyle Korver, Tyson Chandler, Jason Terry, Jamal Crawford, all these guys who are no longer in the NBA who were playing just 5 years ago. And then the flip side of that coin is some of the stars, some of the future faces of the NBA that we enjoy now. Looking back 5 years ago, we're playing overseas or in college. Luka in Europe, Trae Young playing in Oklahoma, Mikal Bridges playing at Villanova, and SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, playing at Kentucky. And if you really want to consider something wild, it's that teams at the bottom of the NBA this year are placing all their hopes on future success, on the draft lottery being kind to them and giving them Victor Wembanyama, who 5 years ago was just a 14-year-old kid. And who would have guessed that 14-year-old kid 5 years later would have the hopes and dreams of some franchise resting on his shoulders. Of course, I would be remiss if amongst this discussion about all the change, I didn't point out that some important things are still the same. For example, our 3 main candidates for MVP this year, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's still with the Milwaukee Bucks, a 2-time MVP, an NBA champion, Nikola Jokic, 2-time MVP, still with the Denver Nuggets, and Joel Embiid, still with the 76ers, possibly an MVP this year. And then, of course, as the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. 5 years ago, the Golden State Warriors were the defending champions. And alas, this year, the Golden State Warriors are the defending champions. I'm fascinated to see what's going to come in the next 5 years and just how different the NBA might be, where I could do another video where we could say things like, can you believe that name star X was on this team 5 years ago? Hopefully, the Jays are both still in Boston.